Well, folks, last night was the Met Gala, and every single year, the Met Gala is a display straight from Panem in the Hunger Games. People dressed in idiotic costumes, the height of culture, people who are showing fashion to the rest of society, which usually means androgyny, people dressed like shower curtains, and all of the rest. But there was something that was kind of fascinating about this year's Met Gala, and that was the theme. So the theme of this year's Met Gala was Garden of Time. It was based on a short story by an author named J.G. Ballard from 1962. J.G. Ballard, sort of an interesting character, politically heterodox, not somebody who's sort of straight line, party line left, but also not somebody who was right-wing. He considered himself moderate. But this story, Garden of Time, is a fascinating story, and this is what the theme of the Met Gala is. And it's fascinating because it has something to say about the status of our society and the elites within our society. So the story of Garden of Time from 1962 is basically about this couple who is stuck in the past. They play Mozart, they dress in very fancy outfits, and they are in this walled, gardened estate. And over across the horizon, they can see a mob approaching. And in order to stop the mob, they have this magical garden, and they can snip off the flowers from this magical garden. And these flowers essentially pause the mob in its attempts to take over the mansion and destroy everything. But the garden, it's a short story, the garden is decreasing in the number of flowers that it has. It has a set number of flowers. And the worse things go, the more flowers have to get snipped off. And eventually, at the end of the story, the two people, this couple, ends up turning into statues, and the mansion is overrun. And here's a segment from the short story, quote, "As the Mozart chimed delicately around him, flowing from his wife's graceful hands, he saw that the advance columns of an enormous army were moving slowly over the horizon. At first glance, the long ranks seemed to be progressing in orderly lines, but on closer inspection, it was apparent that, like the obscured detail of a Goya landscape, the army was composed of a vast, confused throng of people, men and women, interspersed with a few soldiers in ragged uniforms pressing forward in a disorganized tide." So in this short story, the mob isn't good. The mob is just the mob. The people who wall themselves off from humanity and are maintaining this Garden of Time, pressing off the mob from gaining control, they're not necessarily good either, but at least they're cultured. At least these are people who like Mozart. They express love for one another. They have a solid marriage, obviously. And eventually, they end up being overrun. Well, I'm not sure if the people who read this story were the people who decided on the theme at the Met Gala, or if they just misinterpreted the story completely, and what they think that the story actually is about is the fragility of nature or something, which it clearly is not about. It really is about the elites versus mob rule and the inability to bridge that gap. That's really what the story is about. But it is the story of the Garden of Time that was really the story last night. Not just because, again, of the celebrity morons who put on very, very expensive outfits they will wear once and then show off for the cameras, but because right outside there was, in fact, a braying pro-Hamas anti-American mob. And that juxtaposition is pretty telling about where we are in Western civilization right now. So here's just a few pictures of our idiot celebrities who were appearing at the Met Gala last night. Some of them dressed in just the height of fashion. This one is, Doja Cat? The person who named herself after both marijuana and a feline, who decided to dress herself essentially in a sheet. And this is considered fashion. And these are the people in the new Garden of Time. These are the people who have walled themselves off in the garden of our culture. There's also Doja Cat, but now she's wearing a bath towel. So she's doing the full bathroom panoply here. She's got the sheet, she's got the shower curtain, she's got the bath towel. This is the height of our culture, our stupid culture. At least you can say that the protagonists in Garden of Time, the short story, liked Mozart and dressed well. These people are just clowns, which we'll get to in just one second. Then you have Lana Del Rey, who was dressed in a mosquito net and covered in branches. And these are the people in the new Garden of Time. Now, the difference between the characters in this Garden of Time and the mob braying outside was pretty stark. You have Lizzo also, who I don't even know what this is. I don't know what's happening with Lizzo. Lizzo appears to have been eaten by a beekeeping outfit. In any case, this is what was going on inside the Met Gala, which again is always a repository of very disconnected, extremely rich musicians who also hate the civilization in which they live, which we'll get into in just one second. We'll have a full review of all the outfits from the Met Gala coming this weekend, by the way. But just outside, there were a bunch of braying mobs attempting to crash the Met Gala. So this literally was the plot of Garden of Time. the short story. A bunch of elites who are inside, frozen in time, and you have a bunch of people outside who are just a mob from a Goya painting. And here they are. They're knocking down barricades in an attempt to storm the Met Gala, in an attempt to make whatever point they are making. And then the point is generally anti-American. They don't like the civilization in which they live. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, can your savings weather another economic storm? Think about what you've put away for the future. Inflation can render cash worthless. Real estate can crash, as it did in 2008. A famous example of somebody who did not diversify was Bernie Ebbers, the former CEO of WorldCom in the late 90s and early 2000s. When the telecom industry faced a downturn, WorldCom's financial instability was exposed. The company had not diversified their investments. They had not created a buffer against sector-specific downturns. Things did not go well at WorldCom. Don't be like Bernie. During times of economic uncertainty or market volatility, investors tend to flock to gold as a safe haven asset. Its value tends to increase during turbulent times, providing that buffer against market downturns. This is why people are turning to gold right now. It's why Birch Gold is busier than ever. Birch Gold understands that navigating financial decisions can be daunting. That's why their dedicated in-house IRA department is there to guide you every step of the way. Birch Gold is committed to addressing your questions and concerns promptly. Their team is always ready to provide answers and clarity. Whether it's about fees, taxes on rollovers, or the timing of the process, they're here to ensure you feel valued and well-informed. Text BEN to 989898. Talk to one of Birch Gold's experts and claim your free info kit on gold. You'll learn how to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. The best part is, it doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. Just text BEN to 989898. That's BEN to 989898. Now, here's the difference between the short story Garden of Time and what actually happened last night at the Met Gala. The difference is that in the short story Garden of Time, the elites are actually opposed to the values of the mob. As we say, the elites in Garden of Time are people who listen to Mozart. They're people who are very delicate in their sensibilities. They're people who come from a past vestige of civilization. The people who are now our celebrities, the people in our elite culture, these are people who sympathize with the protesters, who clap for the protesters, who march for the protesters. Now, why do they do that? Well, the answer is they believe that they can co-opt them. This is also true of the leaders of the Democratic Party. This is why they refuse to dissociate from the nutty anti-American protesters on college campuses. They believe they can co-opt the mob. They believe that if they can grab the reins of that runaway carriage, then they can somehow direct it in a direction they wish to go. That if they can rechannel that river of human sentiment and anger, that they can direct it across the landscape in a way that they wish to control. They are wrong, and the revolution is going to eat them. And the revolution is going to eat them because the revolution always eats its own. It always eats the people who try to control the revolution. Now, for people who are the heads of the Democratic Party, there was a payoff involved. The payoff was always, if we give you part of what you want, then you will allow us to maintain control. And this has been true throughout the Democratic Party's attempts to rule over the mob. It's been true since the 1930s, when the Democratic Party was attempting to channel socialist outrage at American capitalism toward the New Deal. It was true in the 1960s and 1970s, when the Democratic Party was trying to channel outrage about the Vietnam War and civil rights and the sexual revolution into their own program. And it is true now when the Democratic Party is trying to channel the rage of the Black Lives Matter mob or the pro-Hamas mob into electoral victory. There's always the attempt. If we give you half of what you want, maybe you'll vote for us and you'll keep giving us the power, keep giving us the power, keep giving us the power. The problem is it always goes bankrupt. It always goes bankrupt because the value system that the mob believes now is wrong and bad. Sometimes the mob is just wrong. In fact, very often the mob is just wrong, which is something that our founding fathers knew, which is why they did not like mob rule. That's why the founding fathers built all these checks and balances into American government. Ever wonder why the founding fathers weren't in favor of pure democracy? The answer is, if there was one thing they feared more than oligarchy, it was mob rule. They talk about it routinely in the Federalist Papers and in all their letters to one another. And they were not wrong, because it turns out that mob rule is actually a terrible form of tyranny. But the Democratic Party has attempted to channel this mob rule. And they've done so in part through economic payoffs. The bargain of the New Deal, effectively, and of the Great Society programs of LBJ was, if we give you other people's money, then you will allow us to maintain control of this runaway carriage. And so, for example, this is why they have been big proponents of giant social welfare schemes, because it's a payoff. LBJ described it as much in the 1960s, suggesting that basically all of these giant government programs were a sop to the revolutionary wing of his own party. If you pay them off enough, maybe they'll be quiet, and then they'll just support you when they go to the ballot box. And the problem is, all of this redistributionist schemes, bad values. It all comes due. The bill comes due. And then the mob wins. And it's going to come due sooner rather than later. And by the way, this is not just the Democratic Party problem. This is a both parties problem because it turns out that the actual bill that is coming due right now is going to be due for all Americans, not just for Democrats or the mob that supports them. According to the Washington Post today, Social Security and Medicare will run out of money in just over a decade. A new report warned on Monday, putting fresh pressure on Congress to address the nation's financial health as federal debt rises and the population ages. The trustees for the massive retirement programs project that Social Security will be totally insolvent by 2035, Medicare by 2036. That would, of course, force benefit cuts. The current improvement in the job market and the economy may not last, and it doesn't change an overall bleak picture, according to the trustees. Representative David Schweikert of Arizona, vice chair of the Joint Economic Committee, said, quote, "This isn't a report where everything is fine and wonderful. It almost shows you how much we are living on a razor's edge." And this is right. So the question becomes, what do you do with this mob? Well, it turns out that the mob, they're just citizens. They are just American citizens. And they've been educated in lies by the same elite that are going to the Met Gala, by the same elite that run our educational institutions and are currently attempting to curry favor with the pro-Hamas mob on their campuses. It turns out that when the elites play an inside-outside game with the mob, yes, the mob eventually eats them, but also they are training the mob in really, really bad things. When you decide to teach the mob, for example, that American systems are inherently racist, that American systems are inherently classist, that the West is inherently bad, not only is that historically vacuous, I mean totally vacuous. Take a look at literally any of the rival civilizations to American hegemony over the course of the 20th century. They are all total garbage. I don't just mean total garbage in terms of unworkability. I mean mostly evil. Whether you're looking at Japanese imperialism, which killed some 29 million people, or whether you're talking about Stalinism, which killed, again, some 20 million people, whether you're talking about fascism in Europe, which killed tens of millions of people, whether you're talking about communism in China, which killed probably 40 million people, whether you're talking about current day Islamic Sharia law, which keeps people, hundreds of millions of people, in repression and Jew hatred and West hatred. There is no rival system. There is no rival system to the West. And buying into the lie that the West is uniquely bad, that the West is even the same bad as the rest of these civilizations, it is a lie. But in order to keep the mob going, which is what so many politicians and elites need in order to maintain power, they have to keep lying to them and teaching them lies and embedding those lies in every aspect of our educational system, which is what you are seeing coming to fruition right now. What we have in the West is a crisis of the mob, and that mob has been created by an elite set of institutions that have been thoroughly taken over by people who despise the West and trained the mob in a particular way so they could channel them against the system itself. And that is how you have such lack of moral clarity in the West. Total lack of moral clarity. No understanding of what values the West stands for, or even more importantly, what the West's enemies stand for. That total lack of moral clarity translates into policy, very confused policy that weakens the West. And that's what we are seeing right now with regard to Rafah over in the Israel-Hamas conflict. We'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, my days are incredibly full between the show, being a dad, various other responsibilities. I can't keep up with my day if I don't get a good night's sleep. That is why I appreciate my Helix sleep mattress. So last week, I spent many nights not on my Helix sleep mattress. My kids all had some sort of virus. So I was in all of their rooms on, one of those fold-away mattresses. It was not great. Well, now I'm back on the Helix sleep mattress. I'm better than ever. Helix harnesses years of mattress expertise to offer a truly elevated sleep experience. That Helix Elite collection includes 6 different mattress models, each tailored for specific sleep positions and firmness preferences. If you're nervous about buying a mattress online, you don't have to be. Helix has a sleep quiz that matches your body type and sleep preferences to the perfect mattress, because why would you buy a mattress made for somebody else? I took that Helix quiz. I was matched with a firm but breathable mattress. I love the mattress. My wife loves the mattress. We are big Helix fans at the Shapiro house. In fact, when we had our cousins from out of town stay at the house earlier this year, they asked where the mattress in the guest room was because they loved it so much. And then they went home and they bought their own mattress from Helix Sleep. Helix has a 10-year warranty. You get to try it out for 100 nights risk-free. They'll even pick it up for you if you don't love it, but you will. Helix's financing options, flexible payment plans make it so a great night's sleep is never far away. They're offering up to 30% off all mattress orders plus 2 free pillows for my listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/Ben. It's their best offer yet. It's not going to last long. helixsleep.com/Ben. With Helix, better sleep starts right now. This is the most morally clear conflict in modern history. It's unbelievably clear. There are a lot of conflicts that are not particularly clear. When it comes to, for example, the Iraq War, not a morally clear conflict. The United States used a particular set of justifications for Iraq that turned out not to be true. Also, Saddam Hussein was a brutal and evil dictator. Not a morally clear conflict, despite all attempts to create a morally clear conflict from one that was not. When it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war, it is a morally clear conflict in the sense that Russia committed a grave violation of moral norms by invading a sovereign country. Also, it happens to be that there are a series of ongoing border issues between Ukraine and Russia that have been going on for literally decades, if not centuries. But that's a fairly morally clear conflict. The morally clearest conflict on planet Earth right now is between a terrorist group that was literally handed control of territory by an American ally democracy. That terrorist group then proceeded to spend the next 20 years stealing every iota of humanitarian and financial aid into the area and building the largest set of terror tunnels in human history. In human history. Let's be clear. Iwo Jima, which was an island in the Pacific that cost tens of thousands of American lives because the Japanese were so well entrenched and well fortified during World War II. They built about 11 miles of tunnels. The Gaza Strip apparently has about 300 miles of tunnels because that's what Hamas built. They then proceeded to fire rockets into Israel every couple of years at a minimum. And then they crossed the barrier between the Gaza Strip and Israel proper, murdered 1,200 Israelis, and took 250 Israelis, including 5 American citizens who are still alive, hostage in the Gaza Strip. Israel then went to war with Hamas. Hamas has attempted to maximize Palestinian death because they know that the West is morally confused and stupid. And so they figure that if they can get enough Palestinians killed, then the West will tell Israel to stop, even though it is Palestinian Hamas that wants Palestinian Arabs to die. That is why Hamas is hiding behind civilians. It is why they've embedded in schools, in mosques. It is why they are literally, right now, firing mortars at humanitarian aid stations. It is why Hamas has stolen every iota of humanitarian aid that is coming into the Gaza Strip right now, hijacked it. It's why Hamas will shoot people attempting to prevent it from doing so. It is why Hamas continues not to surrender, but to engage in battle from among civilians to get Palestinians killed in the hope that the West, in its own moral confusion and an attempt to appease the braying mob, will somehow then undercut Israel in its absolutely morally just attempts to extirpate one of the worst terror groups on planet Earth. A terror group that is currently still holding 133 hostages. I'm sure most of them already murdered by Hamas. And the West can't make up its mind. They can't make up their mind. Because when it comes to the Biden administration, they are so morally confused. They have bought what they were originally selling. They've bought the program that the left was originally selling. The program the left originally sold to the mob was that the West is inherently flawed in Marxist ways. It is inherently flawed. It is the product of an evil, rapacious capitalism. It is the product of an evil, discriminatory church, the West. And so the West can only be cured by applying Marxist redistributionism. But first you have to teach the population that the civilization in which they live is deeply and inherently flawed, so they will give you the power in order to fix that flaw. After generations of that sort of teaching, you end up with a civilization unable to tell the difference between friend and foe. A civilization that currently has its young people out in the streets by the tens of thousands, standing for an actual honest-to-God terror group. That, again, committed the worst terror atrocity since the Holocaust on Jews, and that continues to hold hostages literally right now. And our media is replete with these people, which means that they just continue to parrot the absolute lies emanating from Hamas. So the reason this is relevant is because right now Israel is about to go into Rafah. At long last, Israel should have done this literally months ago. Instead, they futzed around, believing that the West still had some sort of moral compass. Well, it turns out the West doesn't have a moral compass. The West has decided that moral relativism rules the universe, and that there is now a moral equation between Hamas, a terror group, an Iranian proxy, and Israel, a democratic ally of the United States with a unity government spanning from left to right. So yesterday, Hamas decided to play its sort of last card. And it did so pathetically enough with the help of the U.S. government under Joe Biden. So yesterday, as Israel announced that it had put forward its sort of best and final in terms of an offer, they've been undergoing negotiations to try and free their hostages. They're willing to trade away literally hundreds of Palestinian murderers, terrorist murderers, for innocent hostages. They're willing to do that and to agree to a temporary ceasefire. Hamas said, no, that's not what we want. We want you to withdraw from the Gaza Strip entirely and hand the control back to Hamas, which committed these atrocities in the first place. That was Hamas's bargain. And Israel said, no, we're coming in. At which point, about 5 minutes before Israel went in, Hamas announced that it was going to accept a ceasefire deal. Now, this was obviously a lie. The reason I say this was obviously a lie is because there was no ceasefire deal on the table for Hamas to accept. They'd already rejected the one that Israel offered. So they announced that there would, in fact, be a ceasefire deal. And the media, in their all-knowing moral relativistic wisdom, decided that probably Hamas was telling the truth. So here is how the media reacted to Hamas's lie. Hamas basically accepted an offer that was never made, as it turns out, and as everyone with half a brain knew. Hamas was not going to accept an offer Israel had made because it would end with Israel extirpating Hamas, which they won't allow. And so what they did is they said, we accept the offer. The offer is everything we want. Well, by that standard, I accept Jeff Bezos' offer for a $2 billion a year salary. Thanks, Jeff. And you can't accept offers people never made. It doesn't matter. The media immediately leapt to report that Hamas had accepted the ceasefire. Why? In order to shift the moral onus on Israel not to go into Rafah. By the way, it is in the interest of the West that Israel go into Rafah, finish off this war, maintain security control of the Gaza Strip, sign a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, normalize relations, and then help to contain Iran and its proxy forces. This is all very obvious stuff if you have any semblance of a moral spine at all. But as we've been discussing, the West no longer does. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, finding that perfect sleep aid, it can feel like uncovering a hidden treasure. Whether you're struggling with occasional insomnia or battling chronic sleep disturbances, the right sleep aid can make all the difference in the world, which is why you need to check out Beam's Dream Powder. Beam is not just a run-of-the-mill sleep aid. It's a concoction carefully crafted to help you slip into the sweet embrace of rest without the grogginess that often accompanies other sleep remedies. Beam Dream Powder contains a powerful all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. Producer Savvy, she's been enjoying Beam's Dream Powder. It helps her get that great night's sleep, even with the toddler waking her up today. My listeners get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, their best-selling hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Beam has delicious flavors like cinnamon cocoa, chocolate, peanut butter, and mint chip. Better sleep has never tasted better. So just mix some Beam Dream into hot water or milk. You stir a froth and enjoy before bedtime. Don't waste another night battling the bedtime blues. Get yourself some Beam right now. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, take advantage of 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/Ben. Use code Ben at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/Ben with my promo code Ben for up to 40% off your order. So here's how the media reacted to Hamas just lying. They just accepted what Hamas said outright, which they've been doing this entire time, by the way. Hamas has lied about how many casualties have been suffered in the Gaza Strip. Hamas lies about who is suffering those casualties. Hamas lies about particular details of attacks, including originally the Al-Shifa hospital. And yet the media continue just to eat this stuff up. They eat it up because, again, according to the media, Western powers are bad, or at the very least, they're morally equivalent to terror groups. Here's how the media responded to Hamas's obvious lie.
For the first time since that last ceasefire deal, which lasted only a week, collapsed on December 1st last year, this is the first time that we have heard from Hamas that they are prepared to accept a ceasefire proposal.
As we are reading here, we want to temper this because we have not got an official Israeli response. There is, in about half an hour or so, the usual military evening press conference. I don't know whether the Israeli military will have anything to say in that. An agreement to a ceasefire would come from the government, I guess, but there is this scheduled event in about half an hour or so. But the Israelis are not saying anything at the moment.
In the last few moments, we have heard that Hamas has announced it has accepted an Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal. These are live pictures in Rafah. People have been out on the streets celebrating that news.
Celebrating that news, which is fake. It is literally fake news. Hamas did not accept a proposal that was actually offered by the Israelis. The entire media swallowed it wholesale. By the way, one of the people you hear speaking there is from Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a Qatar-backed propaganda network that literally just propagandizes on behalf of Hamas. They put up chyrons that say genocide in Gaza. Israel barred Qatar and Al Jazeera from broadcasting in Israel because they're just a propaganda network on behalf of the enemy that Israel is attempting to fight, which of course led the West to then condemn Israel for not allowing anti-Israel propaganda designed for Israel's destruction into the country in a time of war. I don't remember the United States during World War II welcoming in all sorts of newspapers sponsored by the Nazi Party of Germany in the United States. It turns out during times of war, you don't typically do that. In any case, the entire media decided to buy into this crap, and it was absolutely crap. And it was fostered by the United States. This is the part that's so pathetic. It was fostered by the United States. So Barack Ravid, who again is a stenographer for Jake Sullivan, he will just write whatever the Biden administration wants. They just get him on the hotline. They say, here's what we want you to write, and he writes it. He is now reporting, according to Axios, quote, Israeli officials claim the Biden administration knew about the latest hostage and ceasefire deal proposal that Egypt and Qatar negotiated with Hamas, but didn't brief Israel before Hamas announced it accepted it on Monday. So in other words, what happened? Egypt, Qatar, and the United States designed a deal that Israel had not even been presented with. They then presented it to Hamas. Hamas then went ahead and accepted the deal without any Israeli acceptance of the deal. And all of this, according to Israeli officials, and in all likelihood, was designed to box Israel into the corner. The United States, in other words, worked with Qatar, a state sponsor of Hamas and a state sponsored by Iran, and Egypt, which is desperately attempting to avoid any conflict in Rafah because it might mean they have to accept Palestinians into Egypt, which of course the Egyptians would never do. Only the Jews are supposed to deal with the Palestinians, never any of the surrounding Muslim states, all of whom, literally all, refuse to take any Palestinian refugees. They're co-religionists. So Axios says, the episode has created deep disappointment and suspicion among senior Israeli officials regarding the U.S. role in the hostage deal talks and could negatively influence the negotiations going forward. The U.S. official said this is an extremely difficult process with negotiations conducted through intermediaries in Doha and Cairo. He added the U.S. believes Israel has engaged in the talks in good faith and that Israel's late April proposal was the most forward-leaning proposal to date. To secure a ceasefire, Hamas simply needs to release hostages. It's all mapped out. Apparently, Hamas announced on Monday it accepted a ceasefire proposal given to it by Egypt and Qatar. When Israelis read that Hamas had responded, they were surprised to see it contained many new elements. What were the new elements in the deal, by the way? That Israel had never offered, but Hamas, quote unquote, accepted. A complete military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. The substitution of dead bodies for live ones. Originally, Israel had negotiated for the release of 33 hostages. Hamas said, what if we just give you 33 corpses? Seems like that might make a difference in the negotiations, no? If you kidnap my child and I negotiate for my child's release and you say, how about this? How about I just give you back the body? It turns out that's a material change to the terms of the deal. It looked like a whole new proposal, the Israeli official said. Two senior Israeli officials said that when Hamas delegation was in Cairo over the weekend, the Egyptians gave them a new proposal without coordinating with Israel. CIA Director Bill Burns apparently was in Cairo and Doha when the talks were taking place and weighed in with the Egyptians and the Qataris and then refused to actually tell Israel what was going on. So Israel felt sandbagged, as they were. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, political betting with BetOnline is a lot of fun. You can wager on real-world events like the outcome of the presidential election, whether Hunter Biden will serve jail time before 2025, or will Biden complete his first full term in office. I was looking on BetOnline today. I saw that President Biden and President Trump have equal odds of winning the White House in November. For me, this was rather surprising. I think Trump should be favored by the polls, which is why I'm picking Trump. But they've also got tons of betting options for the traditional sports guy. BetOnline makes sports betting more accessible and convenient than ever before. With just a few clicks, you can place bets on your favorite teams or events from the comfort of your own home. BetOnline prides themselves on their higher-than-average betting limits of up to $25,000. You can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So while you're watching your favorite team or the news on upcoming elections, why not spice things up with a friendly wager with BetOnline? Go to betonline.ag to place your bets today. Use promo code BEN for a 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN. BetOnline, the options are endless. Go check them out right now. betonline.ag. Use promo code BEN. Meanwhile, John Kirby, the national security spokesperson, he says he's not going to talk about the deal. He doesn't have any detail. Now, again, were the United States morally clear, what they would say is Hamas just accepted a deal that was not on the table. It is a lie. But the problem is the Biden administration has taken the absolute position that Israel under no circumstances whatsoever should finish off Hamas in Rafah. So which means that in these negotiations, they've taken Hamas's side. Hamas is currently holding Israelis hostage and Americans, by the way. And the Biden administration has now taken the actual position of Hamas, which is that under no circumstances, any circumstances, should Israel go into Rafah. This is a position that's now mirrored by the international community because, again, the West has lost all semblance of moral order. So you have the French saying Israel can't move people from Rafah. Israel can't move. They have no place to go. Okay, literally, Israel is directing them to a tent city that has now been constructed in Khan Yunis. So according to France's position, Israel can't go into Rafah because there are civilians, and Israel can't move the civilians in order to go into Rafah, which means don't go into Rafah, which means Hamas survives. You know who knows this? Joe Biden. He literally said in an interview maybe 8 weeks ago that any ceasefire proposal that leaves Hamas in place is precisely what Hamas wants. And that's now what the administration is pushing, while slow-walking military aid to Israel. I don't know how to say this except that the United States' White House appears to have flipped completely to now be doing the PR work of Hamas. It's unbelievable. Here is John Kirby refusing to characterize the negotiations.
We're currently reviewing that response, and we're discussing it with our partners in the region. Director Burns, as you know, is there, and he's working this in real time on the ground. I won't be able to comment any further on this until we know where things stand. I hope you can understand that. I know everybody's curious about what's in this response, what the Israeli reaction to it is. I'm just not going to get ahead of the process. We want to get these hostages out. We want to get a ceasefire in place for 6 weeks. We want to increase humanitarian assistance. And the last thing that I want to do is say anything at this podium that's going to put that process at risk.
Now, the White House is lying. So according to John Kirby, they still support Israel's goal of dismantling Hamas. Here was the White House yesterday.
John, noting everything that you've said about the concerns expressed by the U.S. about the risk to Palestinians in Gaza with a full-scale operation, is the U.S. still aligned with Israel in its intention to eliminate the terrorist threat posed by Hamas?
Of course.
Of course, they're still aligned. They just don't want Israel to actually finish it off in Rafah. And in fact, the White House has said they will not support an offensive in Rafah at all. According to the Times of Israel, the U.S. will not support the Rafah offensive currently envisioned by Israel because it has yet to see a credible and implementable plan to protect the over 1 million Palestinians sheltering there, according to the State Department spokesperson. So let me make this absolutely clear. The reason that those people cannot be protected, if they cannot be protected, is because Hamas is holding a gun to their head and using them as human shields. And so it is now the position of the United States that as long as a terror group is willing to embed with the civilian population, it's now safe in tag. They've reached the tree, they grabbed the tree, they said safe, and now they're safe. In other words, the more terroristic you act, the safer you are, seems to be the position of the West. Speaking hours after Israel began ordering the evacuation of eastern neighborhoods in Rafah, Matthew Miller, State Department spokesperson, said an offensive would, quote, dramatically increase the suffering of the Palestinian people. Actually, it turns out the only thing that will alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people is when this all comes to an end, Israel finishes it off in Rafah, presents some semblance of military control, and then humanitarian aid and rebuilding are allowed. That is the only way this ends. The good news is that the White House continues to be completely AWOL on this, at least at the top levels. Joe Biden still has not made any public comment on this because they cannot allow him out of his rubber room. The President of the United States. Kamala Harris, when she's allowed out of her own rubber room, just says nonsense. Just literal nonsense. Here she was emerging from some sort of shopping trip, and she was asked about what's going on, and here was her response.
Madam Vice President, Hamas says it accepted a ceasefire deal. Hamas says it accepted a ceasefire deal. Your reaction?
What are your thoughts on Hamas accepting a ceasefire deal?
She literally said shrimp and grits. Her response was shrimp and grits. Only the best people at the White House. The adults are definitely in charge. The good news is that we all know what all this is about. For the Biden administration, again, what all of this is about is placating the mob. To get back to our original theme, it is all about placating the mob politically at home and abroad. That is what it is about. And that is why even on Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was yesterday, it was Yom HaShoah, even on Holocaust Remembrance Day, what did the Biden campaign do? They put out a statement about Trump and how Trump was really, really bad. That is literally what they did. They put out a statement, quote, Donald Trump has a long history of anti-Semitic behavior, hanging out with anti-Semites and attacking Jewish Americans. That is what the Biden campaign put out on Yom HaShoah. Meanwhile, they are actively attempting to act as shields for protesters who despise Israel, protesters who literally showed up at Auschwitz waving Palestinian flags. These are protesters who would have been perfectly fine with the ovens at Auschwitz, given their current position that a terror group that loves murdering Jews ought to emerge unscathed from this war.
Right now, I'm at a march honoring the Holocaust, and right behind me is a Palestinian protest when we are honoring the lives of 6 million murdered Jews and 5 million other non-Jews. They're chanting Free Palestine over there.
Well, as everyone knows, a Palestine governed by its current political entities would be a terror state that mimics the exact goals of the Nazi terror state. And the way this is done in academia in the United States, by the way, again, it's an inside-outside game between the mob and the agitators, between the mob and the administrators. It's always the same. You got the elites who think they can channel the mob, and the mob, which is raging out of control. So over at Columbia University, again, yesterday was Yom HaShoah, which is a day in remembrance of the Holocaust. At Columbia University, they put out an Instagram post for Holocaust Remembrance Day. Here is what it reads. You ready? On Holocaust Remembrance Day, we shine a light on the importance of learning to think critically about the role and responsibility all of us share in standing up against hate. You notice something missing in that statement about the Holocaust Remembrance Day? Oh yeah, it's the Holocaust and the Jews. So way to go, Columbia. On behalf of the mob, you've now erased the Jews from the history of the Holocaust because you got to placate that mob. Got to placate that mob. It is truly an incredible thing. Meanwhile, again, the Biden administration, which keeps threatening Israel over and over and over, apparently they're threatening the possibility of allowing the International Criminal Court, which is just a junk organization designed to target members of Western countries, to go after Israeli officials and prosecute them and maybe try to jail them for prosecuting a war against a terror group. The GOP ain't having none of that. A dozen Republican senators have now warned the ICC against issuing arrest warrants for Israeli officials over the nation's conduct during the war in Gaza. In a letter sent by Senator Tom Cotton, who's excellent, Politico reports the senators warn ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan, citing reports the court may be considering issuing international arrest warrants against the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli officials. They wrote, "Target Israel and we will target you. If you move forward with the measures indicated in the report, we'll move to end all American support for the ICC, sanction your employees and associates, and bar you and your families from the United States." Now, that is the proper response. But again, the attempts to placate the mob and to channel the mob are ongoing. We'll get to more on that in just 1 second. First, a very special message from our friend Megyn Kelly.
Ladies and gentlemen, the anticipation is finally over. The moment we have all been waiting for is almost upon us. This Sunday, exclusively on Daily Wire Plus, my new show with Adam Carolla, Mr. Burcham, will make its grand premiere. In this show, I have the pleasure of playing Burcham's wife, Wendy. It feels pretty great doing something for the community, right? Now, let me give you a sneak peek into Wendy's character. Wendy is a force to be reckoned with. She's a top-tier real estate agent, a supermom, and a bit more left-leaning than I am. But believe me, it's a necessary balance to Burcham's old-fashioned caveman approach. Check out the trailer for our new series, Mr. Burcham.
Yes! Headshot!
Dad, my teammates can see your junk.
You're welcome, ladies. First day of school means the bet is on. First one of us to get inside.
You suck, Mr. Buttchump!
Ah, deal got it. Rule number 1, no phones in the wood shop. Fish it out after class.
I found some really great school uniform options to avoid misgendering.
Ooh, what about their allergies? Maybe those theys could be lactose intolerant.
No, we can't say intolerance. We have a zero tolerance policy for mentioning intolerance.
When I was a kid, men were men. Now everyone's wrapped up in feelings.
Real men stuff feelings down with red meat, cigarettes, and violence.
My name is Mr. Wolf. I solve problems.
You know what it takes? Balls. Eyeballs.
He's gonna say that we're too young.
Well, actually, I was gonna say you're too fat. Keep my wife's name out of your damn mouth. You and the geriatric Girl Scouts will be passed out in an hour.
Pass Mommy the wine. The bottle.
Don't make this a prison hug.
Richard Burcham.
Burcham?
Burcham.
Mr. Burcham. Hey, Burcham.
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 Burcham!
Watch Mr. Burcham, an all-new animated series from Daily Wire Plus.
Let the record show I'm a dick.
Premieres May 12th.
Watch the series premiere of Mr. Burcham for free, only on Daily Wire Plus. Mark your calendars for this Sunday night, May 12th. You're going to love it.
Well, meanwhile, again, the attempt to placate the mob continues because for the left, can't say this enough, the goal is use the mob's energy to commit to the change that you really want. If you can just capture, if you could harness the 1.21 gigawatts of power generated by an evil mob, then what you can really do is channel that towards something higher. And all you have to do is keep feeding the mob, keep telling them that America is a terrible place, that the West is evil and genocidal and discriminating against people of color and exploitative. Just keep feeding them all that garbage, and they will keep being agitated and angry and rageful. Instead of teaching them virtue, instead of people learning virtue in American systems, personal responsibility, morality, decency, moral distinctions between, say, terrorist groups that burn babies and democracies that attempt to save them. Instead, they're just going to keep feeding the mob, which is why Colombia has now canceled its full graduation ceremony in honor of the protesters. Their ceremony was scheduled for May 15th. It's taken place outdoors on its New York City campus, where students had set up a pro-Palestinian encampment that was taken down by the cops last week. Colombia said, quote, holding a large commencement ceremony on our campus presented security concerns that unfortunately proved insurmountable. Those are not even remotely insurmountable security concerns. You know what you have to do? Just get a bunch of cops there, and when somebody mouths off and starts actually violating the law, take them away. Very, very simple, as it turns out. Meanwhile, again, the left loves the mob. They like the mob. Here's Michael Moore, who, again, he and Susan Sarandon are becoming one person gradually. It's very weird to watch. Anyway, here's Michael Moore saying that it's important to violate the law and take over colleges.
I applaud every student who's taken a stand on their campus at graduation, whatever. This is the purpose of a democracy, is to be able to redress your grievances, to assemble, to have free speech, and to disrupt. Yes, disrupt. Non-violently disrupt. And when I'm talking about non-violence, I'm not talking about, you do have the right to take over the administration building. I'll tell you, just speaking from Flint, we would have no UAW, no auto workers union if back in the 30s, the auto workers, including my uncle, had not taken over the factories. They broke windows. They locked all the doors. They kept all the police and the National Guard out for 44 straight days in the middle of winter until they won the right to be recognized by General Motors and to be paid a living wage. That only happened because they took over the factories. Yes, you have to take over buildings. That is not violence.
Yes, it in fact is violence. But again, the reason that they want this is because they believe that through the mob, they can gain their heart's desires and their goals. And this involves indoctrinating children, so that those children will one day become part of the mob, which is how this tape emerged yesterday of St. Louis children who are being trained to shout anti-Israel slogans now. These are like 4-year-old kids. It's divided, guys. Anyway. These are 4-year-olds chanting, hey, hey, ho, ho, Zionism has got to go. So you got to teach the kids the hate. You got to teach it to them. Teach it to them real good. And by the way, when you indoctrinate kids at this level, what you end up with is a mob of people who believe terrible and terrible and terrible things. Donald Trump yesterday, he sounded off on all of this. He said these protesters are backed by Biden donors. Correct. There's a revolution from below being channeled and directed from above. Here was Donald Trump yesterday.
Now, it just came out, Colombia just canceled their commencement. Axios. Colombia just canceled their commencement. That shouldn't happen. And it also came out that the protesters, many of the protesters, are backed by Biden's donors. Okay? Are you listening, Israel? I hope you're listening, Israel. Hope you're getting smart. But they're backed by Biden donors. That's where the money's coming from.
He is absolutely correct about that. Again, it's a revolution from below being directed, facilitated, and fed from above. That's why in this particular garden of time, it turns out the elites are trying to hold back the mob by picking those flowers. But the elites don't even like Mozart. They don't even like the civilization. They're wearing the outfits of the mob, while simultaneously trying to pretend that they stand for the mob and making themselves unbelievably wealthy on the backs. It's so cynical, it's so hypocritical, and it's so disgusting. They want it both ways. They want to live high on the hog of the civilization that built their power, and then They want to destroy that civilization in the name of the mob without actually themselves being destroyed. That is their actual goal. It's truly an incredible thing. What we are watching right now on the campuses, I think people are completely misinterpreting the problem. It is not about Israel. There could be a ceasefire in the Middle East tomorrow. And you know what? It would just be the latest ceasefire in the latest round of failed ceasefires in the Middle East, which is like every 5 minutes in the Middle East. What is happening right now is not about Israel. It's not about Gaza. It's not about Hamas. It's about America. It's about the West. It's about the future of a country. We have tens of thousands of students who want to burn American flags in the name of a social change that is being fostered and channeled from above. But eventually it'll run out of control. Robert George, professor at Princeton, he points out that effectively when you see these campus movements, what you're watching is the lightning that precedes the thunder. That it flashes in the sky and then it goes away. But that's not because nothing is coming next. It's because the thunder and the lightning are happening at the same time, but the speed with which you see the manifestation of the thunder and lightning is faster on the campuses than anywhere else. The revolution is not going to abate. It is going to continue, facilitated and fostered by people at the top of the left-wing food chain who want to channel it for their own ends. It will escape their ends and it will eat them, just the same as every revolution has ever eaten its original leaders. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, are you or someone you know fighting the battle against cancer? For the last 25 years, Envita Medical Centers have been pioneering personalized, cutting-edge treatment programs for patients all over the world. Envita has been the leader for patients looking for advanced immunotherapy and genetically targeted therapies, all while focusing on fewer side effects and better patient outcomes. As a global leader in oncology care, Envita is committed to healthcare freedom for all. They've spearheaded a revolution in employer health insurance options, empowering companies to provide their employees with access to not only top doctors, hospitals, and tech, but also first-of-its-kind nationwide personalized medicine coverage. Envita is doing all of this, plus offering significant tax and cost savings, full transparency, and liberation from the grip of commercial insurance carriers. Whether you're a patient in need or a company looking to break free of monopolized healthcare insurance, Envita could have the solution for you. To learn more about their treatment options, visit Envita.com or visit EnvitaHealth.com to learn more about their company insurance programs. That's Envita, spelled ENVITA.com for treatment options, or EnvitaHealth.com to learn more about their company insurance programs. Now, one of the ways that the left-wing elite continue to try to rabble-rouse the mob is by suggesting that they, little tyrants themselves, they're not the problem. The real problem is that Donald Trump is on the other side, and Donald Trump is going to lead a tyrannical revolution in the United States. So Maxine Waters, who literally has done this mob routine for decades, she called the LA riots a massive, large-scale act of criminality involving death and property destruction. She called that an uprising and was in favor of it. Maxine Waters, who's engaged in violent rhetoric her entire career, she is now suggesting that the real threat to the working order of the United States is Donald Trump, because she says that Trump militias are preparing up there in them there hills. Maxine Waters, the most corrupt member of Congress, she sat on the House Banking Committee as her husband made oodles of coin from a wide variety of issues she was regulating. Here is Maxine Waters, who for some odd reason is still sitting in Congress.
And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask the Justice Department and I'm going to ask the president to tell us what they're going to do to protect this country against violence if he loses. I want to know about all of those right-wing organizations that he's connected with, who are training up in the hills somewhere and targeting, what communities they're going to attack. We need to know now, given that he's telling us that there's going to be violence if he loses. We need to know what his plan is and how we're going to be protected.
James Lindsay has talked about the iron law of woke projection. Maxine Waters is like case 1A in that particular study. She literally called in the middle of the Chauvin trial for protesters to, quote, stay on the street and get more confrontational if Chauvin was acquitted. And then, of course, the mob forced his actual conviction, despite the fact that the facts did not support the conviction in any way, shape, or form. Meanwhile, again, speaking of tyranny, the Biden administration continues to try to enshrine deep state tyranny over the country. According to the Wall Street Journal, less than 4 weeks after taking office, President Trump, his senior White House aides, and a group of Republican lawmakers gathered in the Oval Office to sign a resolution that killed an obscure Obama-era energy regulation. In the following months, Trump would sign more than a dozen similar resolutions, undoing a raft of Obama administration regulations on everything from unemployment to education. The effort was made possible by Trump's unprecedented use of a 1996 law called the Congressional Review Act, which allows a new president, with the help of allies on Capitol Hill, to quickly eliminate regulations put in place in the final months of the previous administration. If he wins a second term, Trump plans to use the same tactic. Senior Biden aides are doing everything in their power to stop him. They're trying to Trump-proof as many regulations as they can before they become vulnerable to being overturned under the 1996 law. So regulations, lest you forget, are not laws. Laws are things that are passed by Congress and then signed by the president. Regulations are executive branch agencies controlled by the president, and they make rules. The president has peremptory power over the executive branch, unless his name is Donald Trump, in which case the idea is that Joe Biden is going to enshrine those regulations into law in such a way that Donald Trump can't come in and simply overturn all the executive action that Joe Biden's agencies took. Normally, we would call that tyranny. It is certainly a thwarting of the democratic will. Administration officials say they have until late May to wrap up key regulations. The CRA gives Congress the power to overturn regulations. That power is usually only exercised successfully following periods of transition from one president to the next. The law gives members of Congress authority to introduce resolutions of disapproval aimed at nullifying final regulations put in place by the executive branch. The disapproval resolutions will only go into effect if they clear both chambers of Congress and secure the president's signature. Since a president is unlikely to sign a resolution killing a regulation put forward by his own administration, the resolutions generally only work when a president and Congress of the opposite political party ascend to power in Washington. If Trump wins the election and Republicans keep the House and take the Senate, GOP officials can then overturn all of this. So what is Biden trying to do? He is now trying to enshrine all of this in a way that it can't be rejected, which normally you would call tyranny, of course. But don't worry, the real tyranny is that Donald Trump exists and is a human, which is why the courts are continuing to threaten Donald Trump in the middle of this trial. It's such a fail for them, by the way, giant PR fail for them. Judge Juan Merchan is threatening Donald Trump with jail time in a scathing contempt of court ruling for violating his gag order a 10th time. He said, going forward, this court will have to consider a jail sanction. The order says, quote, this court finds the people have established the elements of the criminal contempt beyond a reasonable doubt. This court's expanded order is lawful and unambiguous. Defendant violated the order by making public statement about the jury and how it was selected. In doing so, defendant not only called into question the integrity and the legitimacy of these proceedings, but again raised the specter of fear for the safety of the jurors and their loved ones. So they found him in criminal contempt again. I mean, honestly, just pathetic stuff here from Judge Juan Merchan in a case that never should have been brought to court in the first place. Okay, coming up, we'll be joined by Michael Shermer. He has now been ousted from Science Magazine for the great crime of not being totally progressive. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.